Peace, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Real Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Tehran, and joined by my brilliant co host, Roxana. Today, we're joined by two erudite researchers to discuss their latest collaborative work, which is a deep investigation into the history and development of the ideas behind one of the most mysterious and contentious figures in the history of American Islam. Deemed the founder of the most widely known black separatist movement in the United States to date, their book, W.D. Fard, The Man, the Myth, and the Mystery Behind the Nation of Islam, offers a fascinating multidisciplinary piece of investigative work that brings us closer to understanding a man who, for decades, has remained little short of an enigma. So we're thrilled to welcome Dr. John Morrow for a second time and Bilal Muhammad for a first time to speak about their latest work. Assalamu alaikum, gentlemen.
Walaikum salam. Thank you for inviting us.
All right. A pleasure to have you two on. I mean, this is obviously a subject you two know inside and out, not just from the many podcast appearances that you have, which can be found on YouTube for anybody interested, but also your earlier book, Finding W.D. Farr, published in 2019. You've even described yourselves as indefatigable, butcher that, researchers who are simply obsessed with the founder of the Nation of Islam. So our first question is this: what first pulled you into this topic? What is it about W.D. Fard Muhammad that's kept you both so captivated all these years?
Uh, it was in the early 1980s when I was lost in the wilderness of North America that word reached me about Allah, W.D. Farad. I was known on the streets of the T.O. Toronto, Ontario, Canada as Crime Master Divine. My street name was Crime. It tells you a lot. I was one of the founding fathers of the hip hop movement, along with Ron Nelson, Mishimi, Rumble and Strong, Dream Warriors, and others. I was running the streets and heading to hell in a hurry. Had I continued on that self-destructive path, I would have ended up dead or in jail. There was something about that name, Allah, that resonated with me. It was a name I had never heard before. I learned about Allah, W.D. Farad, before I learned about Allah, the creator God of Orthodox Islam. I learned about the Honorable Elijah Muhammad before I learned about the historical Muhammad of Islam. The teachings reached me through Africa Bambaataa. I performed on stage with artists from New York who rapped about Yaqub's creation and the Nation of Islam and all of these teachings. I performed with Queen Latifah, Biz Markie, Public Enemy. So all of these artists, a lot of them, they were 5% Nation of Islam, they were Nation of Islam, and they were transmitting these teachings through hip hop music. I was given cassette tapes of speeches of Minister Louis Farrakhan. I was basically raised on Farrakhan's speeches when I was a teenager. So even though I'm a Métis person, mixed First Nations and French Canadian, I was known on the streets as the white black Muslim. It was the craziest thing. So W.D. Farad and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad led me to the autobiography of Malcolm X, where I learned more about the Nation of Islam. By the time I finished reading that book when I was 16, I said, that's it, I'm a Muslim. I stopped doing gangster rap and moved into socially conscious political and revolutionary rap. I was totally transformed. I wanted to join the movement. I went to the only mosque in Toronto to convert to Islam. I was expecting tuxedos and bow ties. The only thing I found were Islamist jihadists and terrorists with big beards and dresses. I said I wanted to join the Nation of Islam. The Imam, who was African American, was baffled. He explained that they were Sunni Muslims. I had no idea what that was. That Elijah Muhammad was not a prophet, that this whole thing about the hidden Imam was out to lunch. So he made me say a few things in Arabic, my shahada, and he told me, you need to take a Muslim name. I said, Elijah Muhammad. He advised me against it. He's saying, no, brother, that's too controversial. So I changed it to Elijah Abdul Alim and the Arabic Ilyas Islam. And then later I was known as Malik Shahid. So I spent years in the company of these Salafi Wahhabi Takfiris who supported all the terrorists of the time. But I also had the good fortune to connect with an imam from Warith Din Muhammad's community, along with some black Shiites who followed Khomeini and supported the Islamic Revolution of Iran. The Islamic Revolution of Iran. His name, ironically, was Bilal Muhammad. Imam Bilal Muhammad. He was from Harlem. He was running the street at the same time as Malcolm. And like Malcolm, he joined the Nation of Islam and became a minister. So by the time I connected with him and he became my mentor, he was transitioning from the Nation of Islam into the Warith Din Muhammad community. So that's my story. And it's similar to the stories of many people who are Muslim today. So W.D. Farad has played a central role in my life since the early 1980s. I wrote an essay about him in high school. I studied his teachings while I was an undergraduate and graduate student. I published articles about him when I was a professor. And finally, in 2019, I published an entire book about him, Finding W.D. Farad, Unveiling the Identity of the Founder of the Nation of Islam. And that was not the end. That was just the beginning. I continued to study his life and teachings and collaborated with Brother Bilal Muhammad to publish W.D. Farad, The Man, Myth, and Mystery Behind the Nation of Islam in 2025. And we ain't done yet. We're working on a third book, tentatively titled The Master Farad Files, which will bring together the works of leading researchers in the field. What can I say? All praise is due to Allah. Brother Bilal, what's your story?
It's certainly not as colorful as yours. So I'm just an Arab dude from Toronto. What initially pulled me in was that I was friends with the late Malcolm Latif Shabazz, who was the grandson of Malcolm X, and he was tragically killed in Mexico in 2013. And so his death led me to this investigation, this deep dive. I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. I watched, of course, the movie when I was younger, the Spike Lee movie based on it. And when you learn about the Nation of Islam founder, W.D. Farad, you're like, who is this guy? Who's this guy that slipped into Detroit? Birth date unknown, origins unknown. The pictures are disputed. The FBI couldn't find him. Who was this man? He converted thousands of people, and many of them believed he was the Mahdi, the Messiah, God, Allah in person. But yet he had this very strange and modern form of Islam. So who was this man? He had this direct and indirect uh, impact on the civil rights movement. What means and methods did he use? Was he intending on his followers eventually finding Orthodox Islam? Was he sincere? Was he a spy? Was his theology a bridge to something else? Was he a con man, a missionary? Was he insane? And how could someone like that disappear into thin air in 1933 or 1934? Maybe was he a victim of a human sacrifice? Did he board a spaceship like the followers of Minister Louis Farrakhan say? Was he assigned a new mission as an agent? This was just a huge mystery to me, and I couldn't get it out of me. And it was like James Bond meets the hidden imam. And the more answers I could find, the more questions came up, and that sense of captivation and wonder, it hasn't left me all these years. So, yeah, here we are, 12 years later.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah, I mean, and in the case of Dr. Morrow's story, you're right, it's not an unusual one. I've actually heard many stories like that. Sometimes it doesn't always lead to more orthodox versions of Islam, but the fact that people from a wide variety of different communities have been interested and impacted by the movement of the Nation of Islam and have taken interest in W.D. Fard is something that, it still fascinates me to this day. And I've seen you mention, Bilal, Brother Muhammad, that where you've said that Fard is one of the most prominent yet most neglected figures of the 20th century. Why do you, within the Muslim context, Why do you think that is, and what makes him so central yet so overlooked in modern religious history?
Mm. So part of the problem is how the Nation of Islam itself views Master Farad Muhammad. And what I mean, like, dare I say, they sometimes neglect him. And so for many in the nation, Master Farad Muhammad was kind of akin to like the angel Gabriel. He's just someone that came, divine, with the message. He delivered the message to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and then he left. And that's kind of his role for many people. And so Elijah is the real focal point for most of the people in the Nation of Islam. And he was the one that labored for 42 years. He's the one that converted and taught Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali and Louis Farrakhan. There's lots of recordings and videos of Elijah Muhammad. Master Farad, much more mysterious. He's seen as Allah in person, but really this is like a formality. And I get surprised and sometimes, frustrated, frankly, at how little he's spoken about, especially as a historical person. He's just spoken about very little. And but this was a real like flesh and blood person. He was active for 4 years. He established these institutions. He was arrested numerous times, and the teachings come entirely from him. Elijah Muhammad relayed those teachings, but Master Fard Muhammad was the one that originated them. He's the one that cooked them up. And yet the nation has only one photo of him. They've only released a handful of letters. There's two membership cards with his signature on them, his uh, Arabic or Urdu script handwriting on it, out of thousands that were apparently given. And there's just so much oral history that's been lost. Even a lot of the children of pioneers haven't preserved so much of this history. And it's only been 100 years since his coming. So you could imagine other historical personalities of religious significance. How much can be lost after 100 years? And this is in the modern day. So I think as historians, we have the responsibility to try to preserve the record in as fair and as objective way as possible. But yeah, I mean, otherwise, I mean, for better or for worse, the Nation of Islam, it's the largest Islam-inspired movement in the Western Hemisphere. That's a fact. It laid the foundations for Islam in America. It was many people's first impression of Islam. So the autobiography of Malcolm X is still, the bestseller or one of the bestsellers on Amazon in the Islam category. So that's the first look, that many people have at Islam. Bean pie is the only food that was created in response to a Muslim identity, right? I mean, we can't say the same thing about shawarmas or kebabs or biryanis.
Yeah, I
Uh,
even heard someone mention that bean pies are the only truly American Islamic dish.
mhm.
In a dish that was born and bred within on American soil. Everything else was an import. So
Yeah, there's an Ayman Ibrahim video, I believe, on Slate, which is like a little
yeah,
short
that's where I got it
documentary.
from.
Yeah, it's a short documentary on the bean pie, so you're absolutely right. But yeah, Master Fard Muhammad, he was one of the most successful proselytizers in history. Muslims talk about dawah, right? So this is a success story, but we know so little about him. So if you're a Muslim in the West, as I am, and you have to know something about your history here. This is a subject that crosses into the Great Depression and science fiction and Imperial Japan and civil rights and mysticism. So there's just so many interesting areas that this crosses into, and it feels wrong, I think, for Muslims to come as immigrants to this part of the world and just know nothing about it.
This new book, obviously, like we mentioned, continues the work you started in 2019 in finding W.D. Fard. This time, you've structured it through 23 separate essays. What new ground are you breaking here that you didn't cover in 2019? And what made you to structure the book in this quite novel, interesting way?
Well, in finding W.D. Farad, I explored all possibilities regarding the ethnic and religious origin of the founder of the Nation of Islam. It was very broad in scope. In W.D. Farad, The Man, Myth, and Mystery Behind the Nation of Islam, Bilal Muhammad and I move from broad to fine strokes, from general medicine to specialized medicine. If I cast a broad net in the first book, we're fly fishing in this one. We went from using scholarly satellites to microscopes. We went from mining for stones to mining for precious metals. We uncovered the identity of W.D. Farad's Bible of Islamism. And so this is the book, and many of us thought that it was the Quran that he was preaching from, but it was not. But I could talk about that a little bit later. We examine the impact of the Jehovah's Witnesses, Imperial Japan, and Theosophy on his teachings. We pinpoint the origin of W.D. Farad's actual facts. We shared one of the earliest accounts of W.D. Farad's doctrines. We established that W.D. Farad did not have a son with Pearl Allen, his first wife. We reveal what was concealed, the fact that one of the early teachers in the Nation of Islam was a white man, Wali Muhammad, William Thomas White. We study some of the earliest writings of Elijah Muhammad from the early 1930s. We crack an Illuminati code that W.D. Farad had concealed in an anagram. We trace the conceptual origins of the mothership. We share the sordid possibility that the myth of Yaqub's creation was inspired by a veritable Dr. Frankenstein, Leo Stanley, a surgeon at San Quentin, who had emasculated thousands upon thousands of Black prisoners to transplant their manhood into the scrotums of impotent white men. He had an international business doing this. We demonstrate that the flag of the Nation of Islam is based on the flag of the Young Turks, and we provide compelling evidence that W.D. Farad moved to Mexico in 1934.
Your work utilizes a lot of innovative research tools, including AI and forensic linguistics, in an attempt to solve previously unanswered questions about W.D. Farad's life. Can you explain which methods you found particularly useful and whether you view them as applicable to other areas of research in Islamic studies? Because, one of the debates that I see going on right now is how to use AI in Islamic studies. And the fact that your publication is really the first one that, unabashedly or without any reservation said, hey, we used AI. So I'm just interested in how, and if you think that what future you see in that kind of method of research.
Sure. W.D. Farad, The Man, Myth, and Mystery Behind the Nation of Islam, relies on artificial intelligence, emotional recognition software, DNA testing, forensic linguistics, digitized newspapers, and anagram breakers. Thanks to digitized books, I was able to locate the true origin of W.D. Farad's Bible of Islamism. Thanks to emotional recognition software, I was able to identify W.D. Farad's psychological and emotional state during the most trying times of his life. Thanks to DNA study of the descendants of Donald Lloyd Campagna, the son of Pearl Allen, who many suggested was the son of W.D. Farad, Bilal Muhammad was able to establish that this was not the case. Bilal Muhammad literally charmed the DNA out of a woman. He even succeeded in charming the DNA out of a man as well. I tried. I reached out to one of the descendants. I said, listen, can you give me some of your DNA? I want to see, right, if your great-great-great-great-grandfather was actually, W.D. Farad. I didn't succeed. But Bilal Muhammad he did succeed, and he got the DNA, and he ran the test, and that's an incredible accomplishment. It shows you how diligent a detective he is, like the Sherlock Holmes, the Poirot, the Clouseau of Fardology. Thanks to forensic linguistic analysis of W.D. Farad's handwritten letters, I was able to confirm without a shadow of doubt that his mother tongue was Urdu. W.D. Farad was not an Arab, a European, a New Zealander, a Turk, a Greek, a Persian, a Syrian, an Afghan, a Jew, a Bosnian, an Algerian, a Moroccan, an African American, or a Jamaican. And yes, that was actually an early theory. Can you imagine a Jamaican Master Farad? His followers could have been known as Rastafarians, but no. W.D. Farad was East Indian. He was from British India. He came from what became Pakistan. Finally, thanks to an anagram breaker powered by AI, I was able to break a lengthy anagram that W.D. Farad published in a newspaper in 1915. It contained an Illuminati code. Can such methods be used in other areas of Islamic studies? Absolutely, and other fields as well. Academics are already using them. As for the ulama, that's a tough sell. According to the greatest jurist in Islam, a paternity test is not proof of adultery in Sharia law. So if your wife gives birth to a son and a paternity test shows he is not your son, but the son of another man, that is not proof that your wife cheated on you. So what is it proof of? Immaculate conception? To this day, we have Muslim clerics who preach that the earth is flat, that the sun rotates around the earth, that human beings have only been around for 5,000 years, that meteorites are actually burning flames being used to pelt or chase devils away from heaven, and that any child born within 2 years to 7 years of the death of its father is a legitimate child. It's the theory of the suspended sperm or sleeping fetus. And yes, I studied this in, during my Islamic seminary studies. So according to Abu Hanifa, the maximum period of gestation after the death of a father is 2 years. They're teaching this to kids in the Hausa and young people and adults. According to Imam Malik, it was 7 years. So many so-called ulama continue to reject science, along with all advances in scholarly methodology. So don't expect any of them to rely on such methods. Leave that to reasonable and rationalist academics. We rely on computational methods, artificial intelligence, archival research, archaeology, paleography, epigraphy, carbon dating, linguistics, textual criticism, thematic and comparative methods, biographical methods, discourse analysis, source criticism, stylistic sociology, psychoanalysis, anthropology, phenomenological hermeneutics, formalism, historical criticism, and every theoretical approach ever conceived. We should apply all ancient and modern methods to the field of Islamic studies. And most importantly, we must set aside our beliefs, biases, prejudices, and preconceptions. We need to set aside dogma and doctrine, strive to be as objective as possible, and follow the evidence wherever it leads.
I agree.
Well, talking about setting aside misconceptions, one of the most shocking things I found about your book was how much what I knew about W.D. Farad was wrong. It was in all the stuff that I'd heard in popular Muslim discourse, a lot of it was inaccurate. So before we get into the evidence itself, what for you are some of the most persistent misconceptions about Farad that your work seeks to set straight?
Yeah,
Bilal, please. Mm-hmm.
yeah. So, well, firstly, uh, the fact that Wallace D. Farad was Wallace D. Ford, they're the same person. It's been proven with pinpoint accuracy. It's one of these issues that just never dies. Me and Dr. Morrow actually have even uploaded videos to our YouTube channels, which establish that yes, Wallace D. Farad was Wallace D. Ford. That's one of his aliases. We explored W.D. Farad's life before the Nation of Islam. Secondly, that W.D. Farad was not Muhammad Abdullah, this Indo-Pak Ahmadi Imam that came to America in the 1950s. and died in the 1990s in Warathuddin Muhammad's movement. Again, you can find those videos on our channels. But what we do in this book is we demystify Farad a little bit. We humanize him. We show where certain ideas and teachings came from. We, as strange as some of the Nation of Islam theology sounds, a lot of it is a product of its time. A lot of the ideas were in that milieu, they were in that zeitgeist. And so our work explores that. We also treat our subject with a great deal of respect. We try to have as fair of an outlook as possible, a sympathetic outlook. We're not looking to condemn or expose anybody. We're just trying to understand the subject matter. And there's a lot of mystery left, and it seems like the more we find, the more mystery there is. So there's a lot more work to do on this incredible man.
Okay, so as I mentioned in the beginning, the person of W.D. Fard has long been shrouded in mystery. And it seemed that in popular discussions, conversations often lean towards, who he was ethnically or what form of Islam he practiced, which sound like the nature of your 2019 work, Dr. Morrow. Um, and, what ideas he later introduced to Elijah Muhammad, as you've gone over, Brother Muhammad. But what really stood out to me in your work was the question of Fard's life, as you kind of touched on, and his experiences, or what his experiences can tell us about what motivated the ideas that became foundational to the Nation of Islam. So I think it's wise to start with his stint at the notorious San Quentin Penitentiary in Northern California, where he served close to a 3-year sentence, and from which his photograph has been widely circulated. I know, like any talks of Fard, you always see the San Quentin photo, and not much is explained within the context of that. So in your book, you describe San Quentin not just as a prison, but as a kind of intellectual incubator, a place, as you quote, blooming with intellectual, religious, and cult activity, filled with books, correspondence, courses, and debates on philosophy, religion, and revolutionary economic systems as well. With that in mind, what do we actually know about Fard's life before his time in San Quentin, and what led to his arrest, and how might the religious and intellectual milieu inside the prison have influenced or reshaped his worldview?
Right. So, just for the record, Elijah Muhammad had a lecture series called The Theology of Time. And in my book, or in this book, our book, uh, I wrote a chapter called The Theology of Doing Time. Because, yes, Master Farad Muhammad did go to San Quentin Prison. And looking at San Quentin Prison more closely was something that uh, Dr. Michael Muhammad Knight's book, The Supreme Wisdom Lessons, inspired me to look into with more detail. So before San Quentin, okay, so let's start before San Quentin. W.D. Farad came to America from Asia under the name Wali Dad Khan in 1907. This was proven by Beatty and Morris's book, W.D. Farad's First Footsteps in America. In our book, we build the case that he was originally from what was then British India. And so he would have made his way to America by ship from China to Japan to Hawaii to California.
Mm.
And in 1908, we have record of him being a tamale vendor in Oregon. And so he operated a lunch wagon. He did very well for himself. He did for himself, as he would later preach. He worked hard. He was called by different names. He was called Fred the Greek, Fred the Turk, Fred Dodd, Wallace Ford. He got into several relationships. He was associated with mostly white women, as it turns out, and Laura Swanson, Pearl Allen, Hazel Barton, and yeah, he fathered a child with Hazel Barton, a son who would tragically die not so long after this period. He operated a cafe in California in the 1920s. He may have been involved in local politics and even some secret societies in this period. So we explore those possibilities. But yeah, he was arrested in 1926 for allegedly attempting to sell drugs to an undercover cop. But it's also unclear what the real story is here because that same police officer was arrested later, um, because like the police officer that arrested him was arrested for running a protection racket. So there might be more to that story. And he would later die in a murder suicide. So he was, a real winner himself. But it's possible that there was, yeah, more to the story. But my point is that W.T. Farad, for better for worse, or for by hook or by crook, he ends up in San Quentin. And San Quentin at that time was notorious. So conditions were horrible. Prison in those days meant punishment as opposed to rehabilitation. There were executions, shootings, gang fights, of course, racism. There was hard labor. There was desperate conditions. But there was also a rich library. And, there were University of California correspondence courses. And so you also had followers of Marcus Garvey in the prison. So yeah, I mean, there was a lot going on. There was also a very prominent Theosophical Society presence and Jehovah's Witness presence in the prison. There were socialists, quasi-socialists, wobblies, they used to call them. And yeah, I mean, almost immediately after Farad got out of jail, he went to Chicago and Detroit and he began teaching. So, what was he teaching? It was something resembling Garveyism, Theosophy, Watchtower teachings, as well as just, math and pop science and things. So we found that Farad was very resourceful. We found a couple of the books he was using, and like I said before, he was teaching something that was very, very much of its time. Social Darwinism was in that milieu, eugenics, naturalism, nationalism, occult rituals, right? This is all in the interwar period. So a lot of what he was teaching was a product of his era.
I mean, you just mentioned the theosophical background of his teachings and how that has roots in his time at San Quentin. Obviously, for our audience, theosophy is like a blend of sort of Eastern mysticism and sort of esoteric Christianity and also occult philosophy. So why was that movement so apparently active even inside a prison? And in what ways do you think theosophical ideas really impacted W.D. Farad's emerging theology and racial worldview and fit into the sort of broader spiritual sort of worldview he seemed to be constructing at that time, the synthesis that he was undergoing?
Right. So for those who don't know, the Theosophical Society was kind of a pre-New Age, spirituality of its time. It was founded by a Russian American aristocrat named Madame Blavatsky in the late 19th century. And this is when Orientalism was probably at its height as well in the West. So Theosophy introduced a lot of Hindu and Buddhist ideas and terms to North America for the first time. It was also Neoplatonist. It was also interested in the occult and Gnostic knowledge. And so, yeah, it attracted a lot of free thinkers in its heyday. So we learn from the book Grimhaven, which was written by somebody that actually was in San Quentin around the same time that Master Farad Muhammad was, that we learned that Theosophy was very, very popular in San Quentin. San Quentin was a place where there were academic books and it had a rich library with books from the Theosophical Society. And we can see prominent theosophical influences in Farad's ideas. So, as an example, race mythology. Theosophy taught that there were these like root races, and these root races, this would be in stages in history. A root race would come from an island. So the Atlanteans came from Atlantis. The Lemurians came from Lemuria. These are like mythical islands. And these root races would have their origin there, and then they would rule for a certain period of time, etc. So, like the Thule Society, which was also similarly, it was influenced by the Theosophical Society. They taught that the Aryans, came from Thule, the mythical island at the northern extremity above Europe. So Master Farad taught a very similar kind of race mythology. He taught a race mythology of white people, that white people came from Patmos Island, and that they would have a 6,000 year window where they would rule, and then they would be defeated. And so Africans came before the Aryans in both Theosophy and in the Nation of Islam. So that's another point. Theosophy also taught of cycles of 25,868 years. These were called precessional cycles. Farad also taught that history moved in 25,000 year cycles. There were neo-theosophical society movements like Annie Besant's movement, which taught that there were 12 masters that formed an inner circle overseeing the spiritual evolution of man. Well, Farad also taught that there were 12 scientists that were also a council that oversaw the history of man and wrote the holy books and all of that. Both Neo-Theosophy and Farad taught that the sun was the first creation,
Mm.
etc. So, of course, it's not to say that Master Farad Muhammad was strictly a theosophist. He was many things. There are some important differences between Theosophy and Master Farad Muhammad's teachings. So, Theosophy, for example, taught universal brotherhood. Farad taught, black nationalism. Theosophy believed in spiritual beings, while Farad didn't believe in spiritual beings. He was more or less a materialist or naturalist. Farad had his own race mythology, so he was creative. He invented the story of Yaqub, the scientist. It doesn't look like he got that from anywhere else. So yeah, I mean, Theosophy was just another source that Master Farad probably drew from. Now, Dr. Morrow did actually reach out to the Theosophical Society not long ago, just a few days ago. They got back to him saying that they have no record of Farad or any of his 80 plus aliases ever being a part of their organization. So either Farad was using a different alias with them, or maybe he learned everything that he needed to know while in San Quentin, or maybe he read it all from books in the library. And any of those three things seem just as likely to me.
Yeah, because I was just surprised that Theosophy would have been one of or something that contributed to his ideas. I mean, we're always looking for something Islamic, but to see that something outside of Islamic ethos could have inspired his religious leanings, that was just mind-blowing to me. Another thing that was fascinating, another fascinating detail that you explore is how before founding the Nation of Islam, and you mentioned this already, Farad was reportedly involved with several white women and was even officially recorded as ambiguously white during his time at San Quentin. How do you think those experiences, both his relationships and the way he was racially categorized, might have shaped his later views on race, identity, and white American society more broadly? And what way do the intersections between dominant American discourses on race and gender during the period help us understand W.D. Farrad's personal relationships?
Like most immigrants in the early 20th century, the odds are that Wally.com, Fred Dodd, Wally Dodd Ford, and even W.D. Farad wanted to blend in, integrate, and assimilate.
Mm.
It was the American dream. He identified as white throughout his life. He was accepted as such. That was facilitated by the fact that he came to America speaking English. That's on the passenger manifest, that he was an English speaking Mohammedan who had a lot of money on him. That immediately that gives you a strong indication of his social and educational class. If he had an accent, it might have been slight or hard to identify.
Mm.
So hence the claim that he was from New Zealand. Maybe some people picked up that, he's white, but he's got a little bit of an accent. He says, I'm from New Zealand. Even though he was nicknamed Fred the Greek and Fred the Turk, Turks, Arabs, Iranians, and Armenians were all considered white according to the racial classifications of the time, Mexicans as well, Hispanics as well. Even as Fred Edward Donaldson, who looked Chinese, and scholars kept repeating that he's Chinese, 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 he claimed to be white. In reality, he was a Native American. He was better off claiming to be Chinese than to be a Native American in California at that time. This is shortly after the genocide of the indigenous people there. That was very recent memory. Yeah, so he claimed to be Chinese. He claimed to be white. He was an indigenous person. Everyone who could pass for white would pass for white, including over 1 million African Americans who could do so. There are many African Americans who pass for white. I'm related to them. I know them. They're my family. So yes.
Yeah, my grandfather was one of 15, and the story in our family was that his oldest brother, he had never had a chance to meet him because he ran off before he was born and never came back. Come to find out that he ran off to New York from North Carolina because he was white passing and no one ever seen from him again. So
Right.
there are plenty of stories like that are
But also,
Sure.
Dr. Morrow, I mean, look at
Yeah.
the comments of all of the videos that we appear in. It's always people saying, "Oh, these two white devils talking about the Nation of Islam," and it's like, I mean, look, whites don't accept me as white. They don't. I mean, Dr. Morrow is native. I am Arab. But this is this just shows you how American exceptionalist view on race is so complicated in every part of the world. I mean, everyone in my family is a different color. We all look like we're from different countries. This is so common in the Arab and Muslim world, in Turkey, in Iran, in India. And so, yeah, like some people would come. You had a famous organist. What's his name? Um, there was a famous musician in the 40s. Do you remember his name, Dr. Morrow? Uh, Korla Pandit. He was actually an African American who would masquerade as an Indian. He would wear a turban. He would say that his father was a Brahmin and his mother was a French opera singer. And he just found that he was more accepted basically on television and with audiences if he would present himself as not African American, but as this East Indian person because he was light skinned. So, I mean, this was the kind of period that Dr. Morrow is highlighting. The people, unfortunately, I mean, every time I do research on this topic, I keep getting like in the newspaper, you see articles or you see advertisements of skin whitening cream. Have you seen these, Dr. Morrow?
Yes, yes, they're all over the
Right.
place.
All over the place. Like we're looking at black newspapers, like the Afro American. We're looking at white newspapers or
Straighten your
mainstream
hair,
newspapers.
bleach your
Yeah.
skin.
right.
And it's
Yeah.
just this was the period, unfortunately. And I mean, you can see how Farad's teachings were just so, I guess, I mean, they really touched a nerve and they really were relevant to a lot of people. Anyway,
Well,
I interrupted.
I was just
Yeah,
going
I
to say,
mean,
do you think that it was Fard's experiences? I mean, he might have been white passing, categorized as white on paper, but do you think that the reason why he leaned towards a more racist theology was because he wasn't accepted by white? I mean, being intimate with white women probably exposed him, especially I imagine in the 20s or the earliest part of the 20th century. I wonder if these kind of things jaded him towards white American society, leading towards a racist theology that he espoused onto Black Americans.
I
Like,
mean, who on earth wants to be segregated and discriminated against? If you wanted a job, identifying as white or pretending to be white was the way to do it. W.D. Farad was so white that he was an anti-Semite.
mm,
He surely read Henry Ford's The International True, which was published in the Dearborn Independent. Now, I'm always in Dearborn. I'm always in Detroit. I know that city inside out. Dearborn is basically an Arab, it's a Lebanese Muslim, suburb of Detroit. So those ideas were circulating in that environment. Master Farad used to be an associate of Gerald Burton Winrod, who came to be known as the Jayhawk Nazi. He was a white supremacist who disseminated the protocols of the elders of Zion. So in his quest to be white, W.D. Farad, when he lived in Oregon, he took a white lover, Laura Swanson, the blonde bombshell. Now, she was a teenager, she was married, and she had a child. And she had had a previous marriage before that husband. So, I mean, she must have married real young or got pregnant out of marriage real young. I can tell you one thing, Master Farad had good taste in women. He also married Pearl Allen. She identified as white. She had light hair and light eyes. Like him, she identified as white or was pretending to be white. She was actually from the Klamath Indian tribe. She was 3/4 white, but she had indigenous status. While in Los Angeles, W.D. Farad married Carmen Trevino. We know very little about her. She was a Latina of Mexican and Spanish ancestry who identified as white. You can rest assured that she was a white Mexican, and there are white European Mexicans, about 20% of the population. They have a high rate of blonde women with blue eyes in Mexico. Farad lived in sin, so to speak, with Hazel Barton. Now, this is a white woman. She was a platinum blonde, right? Who also happened to be a bootlegger and a heroin trafficker. But hey, she was blonde. He had a kid with her too, Wallace Dodd Ford Jr., the spitting image of his father. I guess that makes him the son of God. He didn't die on the cross, however. He drowned while training in the Coast Guard. I guess that makes him like the drowned god from like Game of Thrones or something. Although he was surrounded by some beautiful Black women, including the 17-year-old Bernstein Sharif Muhammad, his secretary, known as the Reformer, who was absolutely enamored with him. If you read her correspondence with Master Farad, it's the correspondence of a teenage girl who is in love with a middle-aged man. She keeps going on about how she loves him so much and she misses him so much and that she would do anything for him and she would die for him. She literally adored this man. But I respect the fact that he didn't feed into that. He didn't take advantage of that. He was very neutral and diplomatic with her. He didn't cultivate that. So he didn't take advantage of that young woman like other religious leaders might have done. W.D. Farad was never intimate, to our knowledge, with a woman of color. No Black women, no brown women, no Oriental or Asian women, only white women. And who did he go visit in 1933 and 1934? Pearl Allen in Oregon, right? He shows up as a guest in a hotel in the Pacific Northwest in that area. It seems he tried to reconnect with her or to reconnect with his son. And then he traveled also to see Hazel Barton in California. In fact, he tried to rekindle the relationship with the mother of his son, despite the fact that she was living with another man. So till the very end, it would seem that he was grasping at whiteness. Now, race, as we know, is a social construct, right? And like American notions of race and racial categories, they don't make sense to people from other cultures. So if you look at Latin America, you look at Mexico, for example, it's not where you're from, it's where you're at, okay? You might be of European ancestry, indigenous ancestry, African ancestry, but you don't identify on the basis of your genetics. You identify on the basis of your shared culture and language. So you are Mexican, whether you're a pure-blooded Spaniard or whether you're 100% Black or 100% indigenous. That's the cohesive unifying force there. And so this is very difficult for so-called Black Hispanics from the Dominican Republic and Cuba who do not identify as Black, who do not consider themselves African, who consider themselves Latino, Cubano, Hispano, Dominicano, right? Hispanic identity. And they come to America and they're treated as Black people. It blows them away. So
Yeah.
some of his countrymen, right? So race, this racial construct was forced upon Master Farad. Now, some of his countrymen were denied citizenship on grounds that they were not white. If W.D. Farad was biracial, namely the son of an East Indian man and a white or British woman or some other combination, he was stuck between a rock and a hard place. He lived in two worlds. Curiously, he never lived in Black areas and never stayed in Black hotels. Hotels were segregated back then. As Supreme Minister John Muhammad admitted, W.D. Farad always stayed in the white parts of town. Was he just slumming it, as we say, and when he was mixing with Blacks? Or was he sincere? I think, and it's just my opinion, that he was torn between these two worlds. I think he was deeply traumatized by racism and discrimination and wanted genuinely and sincerely to help and uplift Black people. If we look at what he taught to Black people in Detroit between 1930 and 1934 and compared and contrast it with his history and biography, it all comes across as supremely schizophrenic, right? He's hanging around with white supremacists and right? And anti-Semites. These people are preaching white supremacy, but he's also preaching Black supremacy among Black people, right? This is very curious. As for gender relations, Master Farad's interactions show the same sort of schizophrenia. He was very liberal in some senses and very conservative in others. He was accused of raping Laura Swanson. Again, a married teenage girl who was the leader of the Order of the Eastern Star. She was the one organizing these dances. Her husband was a Shriner, and she was like the equivalent of a female Shriner. They organized dances in Oregon. She was one of the organizers. Surely that's where he met her, and that is where Master Farad Muhammad learned to waltz. And he was still teaching people how to waltz in the 1930s in Detroit. This guy used to go party and, clubbing and dancing. It's incredible. He never denied having sex with her. All right. Okay. His lawyer argued that since she did not scream for help, she implied consent. The whole trial and its account in the press was profoundly sexist, and he played a part in that. He married Pearl Allen and soon filed for divorce since she was a promiscuous alcoholic who stole from him. And she was also, she was a party girl involved with lots of men. And again, I'm trying to imagine a Pakistani immigrant. This is something else. He lived in fornication with a waitress in Los Angeles. We don't know her name. So he was banging up the waitresses in his restaurant, Wally's Cafe. He moved in with another waitress, Hazel Barton, again, outside of the bonds of marriage. This behavior is not that of a pious, God-fearing Muslim from India or Pakistan. Not at all. He seems very secular. Hazel Barton, with whom he had an illegitimate child, was also a seasoned criminal, a suspected murderer. She had been accused of murder, and a woman with a long history of sexual relations with men. So much for seeking to marry a virgin. The women he hooked up with were wild and immodest, according to Indo-Pakistani and Islamic standards, even according to Christian standards. They were the product of the roaring 20s. By the 1930s, however, W.D. Farad was introducing standards of modesty upon Black Muslim women. It was far from the radical Islamist hijab that surfaced in the 1980s. So if W.D. Farad started to promote modesty for women in the 1930s, was that because his Islamic ideals were coming to the surface, or was he just a product of, or was he just a product of American fashion trends? In fact, women in the 1930s were more modest than women in the 1920s. They went from micro mini skirts and flapper dresses to longer and more modest dresses in the 1930s. So just Google Taylor Swift flapper dress. One of the tiny little skimpy dresses she makes is a reproduction of a typical flapper dress from the 1920s. So this is what Laura Swanson was wearing. All right. So, you know, was he simply going along with the standards of white middle class society? So it's 1934. He's not a citizen. He doesn't have a pathway to citizenship. He lived in a racist, segregated society. He simultaneously loved and hated white America. He wanted to join it and he wanted to destroy it. I would like a psychologist, a Jungian psychologist especially, to prepare a psychological profile of W.D. Farad. How's that for a doctoral dissertation? It's possible that W.D. Farad had enough with white America, moved to Mexico, or maybe even returned to British India. We don't know, but we want to know. We want a body. We want a death certificate. We want a grave. We want closure. How does this story end? We're all just hanging. It's the greatest mystery story ever told.
So it sounds like you basically see his teachings as a reaction to the environment, or an attempt to turn certain categories on its head, because scientific racism was prevalent back then, racial hierarchies, obviously, with racial segregation. So you think all of that combined, his experience, his personal experiences included, is kind
I
of
mean,
what.
we're yeah. I mean, we're all the product of our experiences and our upbringing and so on. And I can see how a person would become that way.
Yeah, I definitely could too, and that's actually what I was thinking as I was reading. Your two
And
work.
so again, we're not judging anyone. This is not a campaign of slander, lies, and defamation. We simply seek to understand. That's all.
Oh,
Um, so after his release in 1929, we start to see photos of Farad dating between sort of 1930 and 1934, including that famous image that you use for the cover of your book, where he's holding a text often labeled the Bible of Islamism. Um, you argue that this label is mistaken and that the book was actually Deliverance by J.F. Rutherford, the president of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. How does that discovery help us understand the kind of ideas Ra was engaging with in those early years after his release from San Quentin?
If you, I have something to say about what
Go ahead,
Tehran
Bilal.
was. Yeah, yeah, no,
Yeah.
I just wanted to, before we get to that question,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
just
sure.
wanted to say in terms of, because Tehran mentioned something about like turning the teachings onto, or the racial categories and the racism onto its head. And I think that's fair to say. So remember that Master Fraud Muhammad came in the Great Depression. He came during the Great Migration. He came during Jim Crow. And so any discussion on Master Fraud Muhammad has to be within that context. And so the people he was teaching were very poor, very undereducated. They would have gone through a lot of trauma in their life. Messenger Elijah Muhammad himself had seen a lynching in Georgia. So, many of them had been through these traumatic experiences. Elijah Muhammad was unemployed. He only completed the third grade of school, and then his school was shut down. And in 1938, there was actually a sociological study by Bainon on the followers of Master Farad Muhammad. And he found that the vast majority of his followers came from the Great Migration. These were black people that came from the South to the North looking for opportunity and looking to escape racism. But instead, they found poverty and they found racism in the North as well. So that was the crowd that the message resonated the most with. And so Master Fard Muhammad taught that the white man was the devil. He said that the white man was the real colored man, not the black man. He taught that black people were not Negroes. He taught that they were the original men, original people on this planet. He taught that black people created everything. And he taught that there was this great Muslim civilization in the East. You know, that Mecca was this Eden, and they had to join on to their own kind and they had to reclaim their own. And so, and yeah, I mean, look, there was science at that time that was racist. So social Darwinism, for example, was popular in the West, and not just in Nazi Germany, but also the United States and in Europe. But also, remember that science at this point, by the 1920s, was also showing that the earliest humans came from Africa. So, and plus you had Orientalism, which was showing the West a lot of, these, glittering things about the East. So all of these things, they played a role into Farad's teachings. They attracted people. And I know I interrupted the last question, but I just want to say that um, in America at large, like Dr. Morrow was saying, there was racism against all Europeans. So people like Farad couldn't get citizenship necessarily. And, the Japanese would be put into internment camps soon after Farad's period. So yeah, Farad's idea of a pan-Asiatic or pan-person of color alliance against the white man is understandable in that context. And some ideas like that also could be found in Marcus Garvey's UNIA just before Farad's coming. So yeah, I mean the racial climate was essential to his appeal, but I digress.
So when Master Farad was arrested in Detroit in November of 1932, he was found to be in possession of a book described in the press and by the police as the Bible of Islamism, which contained a sordid citation: God is a liar, ignore him, and do away with those who advocate his cause. Michael Muhammad Knight and I thought that this sounded, and Charles Upton thought that this was a satanic teaching. And then, was he involved with Crowley's, movement or so on? But I searched more than 40 million books in over 500 languages in Google Books looking for that quote, and I found it. And I searched over 28 million texts on the Internet Archive, and I found it. It comes from Deliverance, the work of Joseph Franklin Rutherford, one of the founders of the Jehovah's Witnesses. The quote matches up, even the page number and everything. And so does the size and shape of the book. I went and I got, images of the different editions of that book to see if the cover matched, the size matched, and so on. The size and the shape of the book, all of that matches up. W.D. Farad was photographed with the Bible of Islamism in November 1932. Two photos of Master Farad in the Bible of Islamism were taken and published in newspapers. It's also possible that the book that W.D. Farad is holding in the official photograph of the Nation of Islam is the Bible of Islamism and not the Quran. Mm. Now, that image has been altered repeatedly, okay? And so the book keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and so on. Was this an attempt to cover this up? We don't know. But it's possible that even in that official NOI photograph, it could be the Bible of Islamism, but at least in the photographs taken at the police station when they were interrogating him, that's no doubt the book. In addition, and this is important, Supreme Minister John Muhammad, one of the earliest followers and disciples of Farad, the brother of Elijah Muhammad, mentioned that he used to carry a briefcase full of Rutherford books when he attended teacher meetings with W.D. Farad, right? John Muhammad was very open that he preached from the books of Joseph Franklin Rutherford, and so did Farad. Rutherford was obsessed with devils, devils, and devils. Everyone and everything was a devil. The world was run by devils. I would encourage anyone, go and read Deliverance, and you can hear Master Farad preaching. Original material, Master Farad was reading directly from Rutherford. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's not a diss. Preachers read from the Bible. They read from the Quran. They read from other books. Master Farad was reading from a foundational scripture of the Jehovah's Witnesses. This is what he was teaching in the Temple of Islam. Warith Din Muhammad, the son of Elijah Muhammad, described W.D. Farad's teachings as Christianity painted black. I don't agree with that. Christianity had a strong influence. It was an important element, but it was not the only one. W.D. Farad was extremely eclectic. He was an appropriator in a positive sense. So what fascinates scholars like myself and Bilal Muhammad is the sheer level of intertextuality and all the cross-pollination. So it's just such a thrill to track down the genealogy of these ideas.
And from there, I mean, and I actually found this aspect of your book really interesting. I had to read the chapter twice. From there, your book moves into another fascinating layer of Farad's religious synthesis, or eclecticism, if you want to call it. Traces of Twelver Shi'ism, particularly of the Gulat variety, that appear in his teachings and were later carried through Elijah Muhammad and even to Malcolm X. That's a really striking find. Can you walk us through what led you to that conclusion and what evidence points to this Shi'i thread running through the nation's early theology?
Sure. I studied the Shiite elements in W.D. Farad's teachings and finding W.D. Farad in 2019. His belief in 12 imams, or 12 chiefs, or 12 scientists, is shared by 12 Shiites, the Ghulat, who are theologically extreme Shiites, those who treat the imams as incarnations of God, and also the Babis. His belief that the imams control creation is shared by some 12 Shiites and the Babis as well. His belief that the imams are gods is shared by the 12 Ghulat. His belief in 24 imams is shared by the Tayyibi Musta'ali 7 Shiites, namely the Ismailis. His belief in the Mahdi is shared by the Ismailis, the Ithna Asharis, the Ghulat, the Babis, the Druze, the Ahmadis, and the Sunnis. His belief in a Mahdi who is half black and half white, Jewish to be precise, is shared by some 12 Shiite scholars. His belief in the hidden Imam is shared by the Tayyibi Ismailis, the Ithna Asharis, the Ghulat 7ers and 12ers, the Babis and the Druze. His belief in cycles of time is found among all Shiite groups. His belief that heaven and hell are allegorical is shared by the Babis and the Druze, and his belief in reincarnation, the transmigration of souls, and metempsychosis is shared by Ghulat 12ers and the Druze, the Nusayris, for example. His belief in incarnations of God is shared by the Ghulat 7ers and Ghulat 12ers. His belief in prophets after Muhammad, that's an Ahmadi belief. The use of a 3-part profession of faith is found in all Shiite groups. His belief in a race of devils is found among the Ghulat and the Druze. We find this in Nusayri teachings. That's just scratching the surface. Now, many of these beliefs are also found in Western esoteric traditions and are taught by secret societies, believe it or not. Some scholars believe that these beliefs entered Europe via contact with Muslims during the Crusades. Some people trace all of these, the Freemasonry and so on to
The Equino stuff.
these botany groups, right, from the Muslim world. Did W.D. Farad bring these doctrines from the East, or did he learn them in the West? And I think it's a combination of both. Was it 50-50? Was it 20-80? We can't say at this point. What is clear is that Master Farad was not drawing water from a single well, but from 1,000 wells. Most Muslims and non-Muslims are familiar with the primarily political speeches of Malcolm X. However, if they were to listen to the lectures he gave to Black Muslims, to his theological speeches, they would simply be blown away. They would never see the man in the same light again. So just read the speech on the 12 Imams that Malcolm X gave in 1958. It's in the FBI file on Master Farad. Let me quote just some segments of it. In Mecca, there's a group of 24 men who are known as gods. These gods have great wisdom, and they are dependent on each other. These men are men like us, and they die like we do. But a son is always trained to take the place of his father, and he is also trained not to reveal the secret. It is known that someday a son would be born to one of these 24 men, and he would be much wiser than they are. This one would be the supreme God. This son has been born and is known as W.F. Muhammad. As Malcolm X explained, the 12 major imams and the 12 minor imams were at the heart of Nation of Islam theology and were a part and parcel of Afrocentric cosmology. Here's another quote. On this earth, there are wise Black men who can tune in and tell what's going to happen in the future just as clear as they can see in the past. And they sit down and write history to last 25,000 years. After this history expires, they put it in a vault in the holy city Mecca and write a new history. This has been going on and on and on. So in the year one of the cycle in which we now live, there are 24 wise men. They're spoken of in the Bible as 24 elders, 24 prophets, 24 scientists, and 24 imams. 12 of them are major, 12 of them are minor. Hello. So now the symbolism of the 12 and the 24 goes back thousands of years, all right? You can you can go and check like encyclopedias of symbolism and so on and look up the symbolism of 12. So the divine council in ancient Babylon, 12 gods. The Roman council of 12 gods. The 12 Olympian gods. The divine council in Genesis. Yahweh is just one of the gods sitting, right, around this table, this council of the gods. The 12 god imams of the Hulat Shiites, the 12 ascended masters of the Theosophists, and the 24 imams of the Tayyibi Musta'ali Ismailis. So this Shiite thread in Master Farad's teachings is unmistakable. However, it is only one thread in a theological tapestry. It's only one solar system in his cosmos, galaxy, and universe, right? So, to me, this is fascinating and intriguing, all right? But there are people out there that when you mention that there are Shiite elements in Nation of Islam theology, right? They say, oh, the Shia are kuffar, the Nation of Islam are kuffar, and all this stuff. That is not what I am doing. I find this fascinating. I find this enriching. I am not a takfiri, and I don't want people to use this to attack the Nation of Islam. It's a religion like any other religion, as far as I'm concerned. Their teachings are not any crazier than the teachings found in Judaism, Christianity, and other forms of Islam.
In terms of sort of ascertaining what W.D. Farad taught and aspects of his life, can Elijah Muhammad be regarded as a credible source? Or was his brother, John Muhammad, a more reliable source when trying to reconstruct all of these ideas?
Did Elijah Muhammad expound? Do you want to go, Bilal? Or Do you want me to?
Yeah, I could go for. I mean,
You can
how
go
do you want
first,
to
and
do
then
this?
I can add, or I can start and you can finish it. It's all
Sure.
good.
Sounds good. Okay, so again, yeah, so a lot of people underestimate Elijah Muhammad's reliability. A lot of people assumed that Elijah corrupted Master Farad's teachings, and even among former and current NOI members, there's this idea that Farad gave people a bridge that would eventually lead them to a higher understanding of Islam if it is decoded properly. But John Andrew Morrow's investigation and my investigation found that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was mostly reliable. I have no reason to believe that he was not a confessional believer in Master Farad Muhammad and everything that he taught. And I believe that he was sincere in following Farad. Now, all of that said, he was the leader of a giant organization. He was engaged in politics. He received a lot of guests from the Muslim world and from elsewhere. He performed Umrah. He met with various heads of state. This was someone who was maneuvering his organization in different ways. And he also gave himself a creative license to interpret and innovate in some of those things. So, he was considering himself to be the messenger of Allah. He was considering himself to be the fulfiller of biblical prophecy. So, as someone who was in that position, he emphasized certain things, he de-emphasized certain things, he innovated things, he revealed things in stages. And Master Farad Muhammad himself said that Elijah Muhammad's answers in the Supreme Wisdom were, quote, very near correct, which means that there's some room for error. There were some things that he could be a little bit wrong about. But yeah, I mean, as academics, we have to look at all of the available sources. We have to look at all the primary and secondary sources. So, we have to look at the newspaper archive. We have to look at the pioneers of the Nation of Islam and what they had to say. We have to look at the FBI records, FBI files. We have to use sources like Bainon in 1938 or Hatem Sahib in 1951, who had that unique look into the early Nation of Islam. There were other academics in the 30s and in the 40s who studied the Nation of Islam, who Morrow wrote about in our book. So, yeah, we can't assume that any one source is gospel truth. People are fallible after all. So, we have to cross-reference everything and we have to come up with theories based on the sources. But yeah, all of that said, Elijah Muhammad, he had a brother named John Muhammad. John Muhammad studied under Master Farad Muhammad. John Muhammad would call himself the supreme minister after the death of his brother. And he didn't follow Louis Farrakhan. He didn't follow Warithuddin Muhammad. He was blessed with a very long life. He died in 2005. He was blessed with very good memory. And there are a lot of recordings of John Muhammad that have only resurfaced in the past year or two. So, and we're finding new things. We have uh, very few recordings of people that met Master Fraud Muhammad, but we have hundreds of hours of recordings of Supreme Minister John Muhammad. So, he's a very good source. He was not maneuvering a movement. He did not go to the Muslim world. He did not do Umrah. He did not give himself this creative license to interpret teachings. He was something of a time capsule. He was someone that just remembered and preserved the teachings of Master Farad Muhammad. And he didn't filter much of it. He would mention things that were kind of embarrassing, things that Elijah Muhammad probably wouldn't teach about Master Farad Muhammad. One example that comes to mind is that he taught that so Master Farad Muhammad would say that his father was a black man and his mother was a white devil. And so he would say that John Muhammad relays the story where his mother would put out a white sheet on the table, on the kitchen table, and he would purposely spill coffee on that sheet to have her go and wash it because she was a devil. So he would go have her work. That's something that John Muhammad said that Elijah Muhammad never said. Now, of course, there might be some symbolism in that because it's the black coffee, overcoming the white kitchen tablecloth. So, I mean, he did speak in symbols, But nonetheless, these are things that John Muhammad will just let out every so often. That's just one example. And so, yeah, and we do cross-reference everything John Muhammad says with what we find in earlier material, and we find that a lot of it does line up.
And we only have about half of his recordings to date, I believe. So we're looking forward to learning from Supreme Minister John Muhammad and everything else that's recorded. So, yeah, I mean, did Elijah Muhammad expand upon the teachings of W.D. Farad? Did Elijah Muhammad rely on other books to further his understanding of what his master taught him? Most certainly. In fact, Master Farad gave him a long list of books to read to help him better understand his theological doctrines. Elijah Muhammad gave us an interpretation of Master Farad's teachings. We're grateful for all of his writings. We're thankful that he preserved the teachings. The teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad merit serious study by scholars and academics, not to dismiss and discard, but to learn and understand. The man was a giant. He made a huge contribution to Islamic and religious thought. As for John Muhammad, he preserved the raw, unelaborated, unadulterated teachings of Master Farad, for which we owe a tremendous debt of gratitude. These men were oceans of information. Skeptical scholars suggested that many of the teachings of the Nation of Islam were later elaborations of Elijah Muhammad, and that they did not trace back to Master Farad Muhammad. So very recently, we only had Elijah Muhammad's writings from 1957, 1965, 1967, 1972, 1973, and 1974, along with re-released material, speeches and interviews that were published in 94, 95, 97, 2004, 2007, 2008, and 2012. So academics had every right to be cautious. The FBI file on Farad dates from 1957. Okay, so we were getting closer. The accounts of Bernstein Sharif Muhammad, Master Farad's secretary, which includes letters to and from W.D. Farad, date from the early 1930s. They were just recently published. We have the originals. So these are primary sources. Some of Elijah Muhammad's early writings, his ministry lessons, I'm talking, we have original copies of them, have been published just recently. They date from 1949, 1937, 1936, 1935, and yes, 1934. December 1934. That's gold to a historian. In August 1935, Elijah Muhammad described W.D. Farad as, and I quote, the wisest and the last of the Imams. Well, that's Imam Mahdi. That's the 12th Imam. That doesn't sound Ahmadi or Sunni to me. That sounds very Shiite in tone. Again, we need to remember, we're talking about Detroit, right? Black bottom Detroit between 1930 and 1934. There was virtually no Sunni literature available. Most of the information on Islam in English was Ahmadi in nature. There was virtually no Shiite literature in English until the 1979 revolution in Iran, and most of those books came out in the early 2000s. Where could Elijah Muhammad have learned Shiite Ghulat doctrines? From the Syrian Lebanese? From the Bektashi Albanians in Detroit? Possibly, but highly unlikely. Black Muslims had little to no contact with Arab Muslims. Elijah's teachings came from W.D. Farad. As for Master Farad, he seems to have brought some of these teachings with him from British India, and he clearly mixed them with other ideas he learned in the United States.
So how difficult was it to, hopefully I didn't interrupt you.
No, that's it.
Okay, yeah, I was
I'm
just
good.
curious how difficult it was to unravel the various syncretic sources of W.D. Farad's theological ideas. I mean, it seems like you guys have gone through a lot. Do you feel you have identified all of the various texts that he relied upon, or do you feel like there are more to be uncovered?
I don't think we've uncovered all of the texts, but well, so some of the sources we kind of knew already. Bainon mentioned Master Fraud Muhammad used Judge Rutherford. He used a book called Conquest of Civilization. He used a book called The Story of Mankind. Michael Muhammad Knight discovered some of the connections to Theosophy, and then I elaborated on some of those connections. I also found that he was probably using the 1928 Almanac and Book of Facts
Mm.
or other pop science books from that time, because it appears in his actual facts and other teachings attributed to him. I suspect that there are other occult sources that we haven't come across yet. And the next book will feature some of the connections, for example, with Freemasonry. So, yeah, I mean, W.D. Farrad's ideas, some of them are original. Some of them could be found in his Zeitgeist. Some of them could be found in the library books from that period. And Google Books has been extremely helpful in that regards, just quoting certain terminology or certain numbers, and then finding books before 1930 that had, said terminology or said numbers. So yeah, I mean, Farad was very resourceful.
Something that really stood out to me when I was reading your book is is the apocalyptic side of Farad's teachings, particularly the sort of very science fictiony, cosmic end of world narratives that he preached. You mentioned that some of these ideas may have been influenced by popular cultural products of his time, like early science fiction. Could you expand a little bit on that connection and also do you see any meaningful parallels between the Nation of Islam's cosmology and movement and the Church of Scientology that emerged a bit later?
Yeah, yeah. So this is a good question. So some of the end times rhetoric was coming from the Jehovah's Witnesses. So both Farad and the Jehovah's Witnesses were claiming that the end of the world begins in 1914. That 1914 marked the beginning of the end. So that's an important parallel between the two. The witnesses at that time were claiming that some believers in the 20s would actually witness the end times and that they would live forever. So you'd have big like newspaper articles with, some people will live forever at that time. So remember, this was also the interwar period, so there was also a lot of anxiety in the political climate. In terms of science fiction, Master Farad and Theosophists would claim to be in contact with people on Mars or people on Venus. And the general idea of Martians can be found, prior. So like H.G. Wells, 1898 War of the Worlds. Tom Cruise had a movie about it. That was in 1898. You had even in the 30s, 1930s, you had people speculating, scientists speculating on life on Mars and what kind of life can we have on Mars? Can you have raccoons on Mars? And there were articles like that. So yeah, W.D. Farad taught that there was this mothership that would destroy America in the end times. So he had this naturalist technological view of the apocalypse, that it wasn't brought about by a spook god, but that it would be brought about by the hands of Asiatic people themselves. That yes, they would have the fortune to actually carry out the end times themselves. And yeah, the mothership does have parallels in, science fiction. Like there was a book called The Skylark of Space, which came out in 1928, and it also had a spaceship. So yeah, so now in terms of Scientology, I have to pause to say that in the 2010s, there was actually some collaboration between Minister Louis Farrakhan, his Nation of Islam, and Scientology, the Church of Scientology.
Hmm.
And Farrakhan actually introduced Scientology processing to the nation. Processing was a kind of it's almost like a hypnotherapy where you're hooked up to a lie detector machine. You're asked by your auditor to go over like a traumatic experience that you had. And you sort of go over that traumatic experience again and again and again until it loses its power over you, right? The as soon as it clears on the lie detector, where you can tell the story and you can even have like a positive reaction. And at the end of that, you're supposed to feel better, and you've exposed yourself to the trauma, and you've normalized it. So Farrakhan introduced that auditing and processing. Now, a lot of Nation of Islam members and Black people found this to be very strange. I mean, Scientology was a predominantly white organization. It was founded by L. Ron Hubbard, who was a white man. And but keep in mind that Master Farad, used the teachings of some white people, like Judge Rutherford. That's in the Bainon article, and that's in the John Muhammad says it, and that's elaborated on in our book. Ultimately, all knowledge comes from the black man, right? So anything the white man has, it's just borrowed knowledge,
Mm.
right? But seriously, like L. Ron Hubbard and Master Fard Muhammad, they did come from kind of similar settings in that, both were involved in occult circles. L. Ron Hubbard was involved in Aleister Crowley's circle. W.D. Farad was involved in Theosophy and Neo-Theosophy. Both of them were they gave like an elaborate mythology. So with Farad, it was the story of Yaqub and 6,000 year history. For Hubbard, it was the story of Zenu. Both groups have a self-help component. The Nation of Islam also it has its Fruit of Islam. The Scientology has the Sea Org, right? So they both have a kind of security or training kind of unit. Both were involved in science fiction, or popular science on that level, folk science or popular science or pseudoscience, and both had like a fascination with secret knowledge, and both have rankings as an institution that you can climb. So yeah, I mean there are so many important similarities between the two.
All right. And on our legacy and reflection part of the interview, how did the Nation of Islam survive W.D. Fard's disappearance? In what ways did it have to evolve and adapt?
Right. So W.T. Farad and Elijah Muhammad, they set up these institutions. They set up the temple. They set up the Fruit of Islam. They set up the Muslim girls training. And these are institutions that lasted until this day, right? They survived. So
So Fard did
I
set, because that was the one thing that I found like very surprising in your book, that Fard was actually responsible setting up a lot of these lasting institutions that we still find today. When I was under the assumption that it was Elijah Muhammad who was responsible for them, but you were going into
Well,
describe.
yeah, no, I mean, it is a combination of the two. So, I mean, Elijah Muhammad, after 1932, was probably the most visible person in the temple and in the institutions. This
Well,
is
I
when
just didn't know
Farad.
that Fard had any hand at all. I was just surprised that he had some kind of hand.
Oh, he definitely had a hand. I mean, he even helped pay for the rent of the temple. We know that he sold his car at one point, according to John Muhammad, to pay for the rent of the temple. He established a poor fund. He would preach in the temple. And so, yeah, I mean, he did have a hand in the institutions. He also, there was also like it gave people a narrative, right? It gave people an origin story. It gave people a sense of identity, a sense of purpose. It gave energy and zeal. It gave a sense of style, incredible, like even just incredible rhetorical ability. I mean, like Farrakhan and Khalid Muhammad are some of the greatest orators, if not the greatest orators of the English language. I deeply believe this if you listen to them. Some of the most erudite, eloquent, articulate people I've ever heard in my life.
Yep.
So they influenced hip hop. They got people off of drugs. They got people out of prostitution. They broke up gang warfare. And yeah, I mean they're just a very relevant staple in American culture. So yeah, I mean the Nation of Islam, it did evolve. Like maybe it started as this quasi secret society, and then it had this civil rights outgrowth, and then it became this pop culture icon. Um, and yeah, I mean, everyone came to prominence in the nation. They all did help steer it in one direction or another. You know, Malcolm, Elijah Muhammad, the more religious side. You relying a lot on the Bible and biblical prophecy. Malcolm X, the more political side. But then, Farrakhan also veering more on the spiritual and charismatic side. So that is, everyone had an influence in steering it in some direction.
So, and Master Farad Muhammad founded the University of Islam, a private school, and he used to teach there. And the University of Islam exists to this day, and it's a well-regarded private school in Chicago, affiliated with Mosque Miriam. But not only that, you had all of these Clara Muhammad schools. And so, Master Farad started this private school for Black Muslims, and then it proliferated. And then there was an entire network of Clara Muhammad schools, right? So that on the Warith Deen Muhammad side, all of those schools continued. And then you have on Minister Farrakhan's side, the University of Islam as well. So that's part of Master Farad's legacy.
Yeah.
Talking about legacy, how, in your view, has the Nation of Islam contributed to and really shaped the African American Muslim experience more widely outside of its own movement?
Right. Yeah. So it made Islam and being Muslim normal among African Americans. This hasn't happened yet among white Americans, but among African Americans, it's very common to find people of, oh yeah, my uncle is a Muslim, my cousin is a Muslim. It normalized Islam. It gave the impression also that Muslims walk a very straight and narrow path, right? No drugs, no alcohol, no pork, no womanizing, genuine love for your community. Even Tupac, in one of his interviews, he was saying that he was in a play a Muslim in a movie, but that Muslim was a drug dealer, and then he refused to play that part because he's like, you can't be a drug dealer and a Muslim, right? So it gave that impression. And that impression still exists on some level, but I think the diaspora has ruined it a little bit, actually. And yeah, I mean, the Nation of Islam gave, it gave the world Muhammad Ali, it gave the world Malcolm X, it gave the world how to eat to live and popularized one meal a day. And of course, they invented the bean pie, which, yeah, it's pretty delicious. So yeah, among many, many other things.
Yeah, if I could add to that, just my experience and the experience of many others that I know, converting to Islam does come with certain difficulties. They can be many. One that I hear from a lot of converts is the family aspect of, the difficulties that they may receive or have to endure. I will say I haven't heard that much in that regard from Black Americans when they convert. I mean, there is maybe some level of it coming, especially when you come from a Christian background. But like you mentioned, most Black Americans, they have a friend, a uncle, some kind of relative, someone they know closely who is Muslim. So when they decide to convert to Islam, it seems like that path is already been smoothed by the work of people from the Nation of Islam that later went into Sunni Islam and in other directions as well. But this is our last question, and this has been a very insightful interview, and it's really opened my eyes up to a whole body of scholarship that I didn't know exist about a person who I thought was largely a mystery. What are the unanswered questions that most plague you about W.D. Fard's life? And do you think it will be possible to answer them in the future?
And in the not so distant past, we knew nothing about W.D. Farad's biography besides what Elijah Muhammad related, and that was paper thin. Elijah Muhammad was more concerned about Master Farad's teachings rather than his life up to that point. The FBI file opened Pandora's box in a positive sense. In recent years, researchers have advanced in leaps and bounds. 2025 will go down as the year of Master Farad in terms of historical research. We have a strong outline of his life, with a good number of details from the time he entered the United States from British India to the time he disappeared in 1934. We know a lot about his Fred Dodd years, a lot of documentation. We know a lot about his Wally Dodd Ford years in California, and we know a lot about his W.D. Farad years in Michigan and Illinois. We know nothing about W.D. Farad's first 18 years in British India, nothing about his parents, family, and community, nada. Perhaps we will never know, but it's worth a shot. I submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to the British government. It was like the Ministry of Defense or something, requesting any and all information regarding W.D. Farad and his 80 aliases. I suspected that perhaps he was an intelligence operative. Maybe he was working for the Americans, maybe he was working for the Japanese. Since this was 100 years ago, many countries are willing to share their information because the subject is dead, all the agents are dead. You know, I wanted to know, what do you know about Master Farad? They responded in absolute terms that he was not a British citizen, but that he might have been a British subject, namely a colonial. And they directed me to the archives of British embassies in India. Now, if someone is a PhD student and they want to write a doctoral dissertation on W.D. Farad, please secure funding for research in India, continue the work that I started, follow that lead. You know, I'm not hogging all of this for myself, okay? You know, I mean, some scholars would. They tell me, well, why don't you pursue it? Why don't you? No, I can't do it all. We need a whole team working on this. And hopefully, and you would expect as colleagues, but unfortunately, that's not the reality. There's a lot of bad blood and a lot of rivalry, and it's really, frankly, immature, you know? It's possible you'll find a birth certificate or other records pertaining to Wali Dad Khan. We know when he was born, 1888, 1889. We know where he was from. If he was a mixed blood, an Anglo-Indian, for example, there would be even more records. He was an upper-class, educated, wealthy English speaker. He could have been a member of a Masonic lodge in India, and they do have records of their members. Anything and everything regarding W.D. Farad prior to arriving in America is campo abierto. It's an open field of research. We have a good deal of information about W.D. Farad's wives and lovers. We know a good deal about Laura Swanson, Pearl Allen, and Hazel Barton. However, we know virtually nothing about Carmen Trevino. We know she died shortly after her, her marriage to Master Farad. Was she also involved with heroin? Did she OD? It would be interesting to know. She was a very young woman and she died. It's very suspicious. Or was she silenced? Because when you're living in that world, these things happen. We also know nothing about the waitress he lived with before he moved in with Hazel Barton. We need to know more about the courses that W.D. Farad took at San Quentin through the University of California to look for parallels, right, between those courses and his teachings. And we need to find out what W.D. Farad's other aliases were, especially the Jewish name he gave to Professor Louis Wirth, the sociologist from the University of Chicago. He's famous for a book called The Ghetto. It was the first sociological analysis of life in the hood, basically. We've searched the membership rolls of every imaginable religious movement from the 1910s, 20s, and 30s and cannot find any of Master Farad's 80 aliases. He must be there. Was he a Freemason or a Shriner? Was he a member of the I Am movement, the Theosophical Society, the Ordo Templi Orientis? We've tracked Farad's movement between 1930 and 1934 with great accuracy. We know where he was and when, but he was not in Detroit and Chicago half the time. He was in Canada. He was traveling regularly to Canada. He was crossing the border from Detroit. He was going to Windsor. Maybe he went as far as Toronto. What on earth was he doing there? He was in Wisconsin. He was in Kansas City. He was in California. He was in Oregon. He was traveling throughout the US. Under what names? And what on earth was he doing? Who was he visiting and why? We need to know what happened to him after 1934. We have strong evidence that he went to Mexico, probably Cuernavaca. Did he stay there? Was he buried there? We don't know. We need boots on the ground. This is work that needs to be completed by graduate level researchers, people with master's degrees or doctoral degrees, professional investigators, people with a background in law enforcement. We know virtually nothing about Elijah Muhammad's time in Mexico. He had spent 10 years planning that move. He was planning it in the 60s. He was in contact with his professor. The FBI was unable to locate who this person was, his professor who was coordinating his move there. He spent the last year of his life there. And not to mention, what Tanetta Muhammad and her children and grandchildren were up to. And most of them still live there anyhow. At one point, we knew virtually nothing about the earliest followers and disciples of W.D. Farad. That has changed. How many people knew that one of the earliest teachers in the Nation of Islam was a white man? He was British. He was an engineer. He was a convert to Islam, and his name was William Thomas White. Tom White, Wali Muhammad, and Wali White, a white black Muslim. I thought I was the first one. Even Google AI did not believe it. It said it was impossible that there was a white teacher in the early Nation of Islam, as it contradicts the teachings of the movement. What does that tell us? The early Nation of Islam during the days of W.D. Farad was far more inclusive than we could have imagined. It was open to blacks, Latinos, the Almansa family. They're still Muslims, and even whites. That emphasis on the white man as the devil, it seems, comes from Elijah Muhammad. We know that W.D. Farad was also teaching that the black man is the devil. He was teaching that human beings could be angels or demons, that they could be gods or devils. Was Master Farad teaching a form of tasawwuf or irfan that simply went over the head of Elijah Muhammad? The Mystics of Islam by Reynold Nicholson was published in 1914. I am positively convinced that W.D. Farad was familiar with the teachings of Rumi, Hujwiri, Attar, Shabistari, Jami, Ibn Arabi, Rumi, and Al-Halaj. An al-Haq, I am the truth, I am God, I am the reality. Was Master Farad Muhammad a mystic? Allahu Alam. There are too many blanks, holes, and gaps in his biography. We need to fill them in. So 1,001 questions remain to be answered.
That was already like 50 book titles right there on future research topics. So, yeah, again, this was a totally fascinating topic, and I'm interested in seeing what else there is. I mean, just his whole life before coming to America sounds fascinating, because, that just opens up a whole different world of experiences that he may have had to, shape his future, the theological leanings. But on that note, is there anything else that you two are coming out with? I know you have another book on basically the same topic that's going to be going more into depth into these things than the current one. But do you two have anything else lined up? I know you're a very active author, Dr. Morrow, and Brother Muhammad. I know you also are part of the Berkeley Center of, is it Islamic Studies?
Yeah, the Berkeley Institute for Islamic Studies. It's a magazine based in Berkeley, California, and yeah, I mean, basically, I mean, this book is available now. It is an expensive book. We get it. If you can't afford it, you can request your library to get it, and the acquisitions department will usually get it. So, yeah, definitely check it out. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, there's always more research coming. You can't pause, right? You can't just be happy with one book. This is an ongoing investigation.
And we've been making an effort to share some of this information with viewers. You have Bilal's Boulder, which, by the way, rocks, no pun intended. So check out brother Bilal Muhammad's YouTube channel. Check out John Andrew Morrow's YouTube channel. We're trying to share this with, with people. But my main focus in the next year or two will be that third book on Master Farad Muhammad. And we already have many scholars and academics and investigators lined up who are contributing to it. Yeah,
All
our
right.
research continues.
Okay, well, we're excited to see what unfolds as your research continues in this direction. Thank you two gentlemen for appearing on our platform. It's always nice to have you on, Dr. Morrow. The last episode that we had with you was really insightful and enjoyed it, and so did our audience. It's nice to have you on, Brother Bilal Muhammad, and we hope to have you again for future research projects.
For sure. Yeah, thanks so much. And yeah, you could also check out my articles on the Berkeley Institute for Islamic Studies. There's a lot that I think people on this channel might be interested in.
All
Yeah.
right. And
Thank you
well,
so much for inviting us. We really appreciate it. And it's
Yes,
nice
a
to meet you
thousand
both.
thanks.
yeah, yeah. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum
Alaikum
salam wa
salam.
rahmatullahi wa
Take care.
barakatuh.